Wyoming's Blackthorn Ranch promised perfect Christmas photos. No one mentioned why their visitors only return once, exactly 1 year later. I am the Nightmare Maestro, and tonight's tale will make you question every shadow cast by Christmas lights. The email arrived at 11:11 p.m. on December 23rd, promising triple Hannah Thorne's usual rate for a single night of photography at America's most authentic Christmas experience. Blackthorn Ranch's website showcased pristine images of sleigh rides through snow-covered pines, children meeting a remarkably lifelike Santa, and 9 perfect reindeer. Their marketing materials promised a Christmas Eve experience you'll never forget, though they couldn't explain why all their visitor reviews were exactly 1 year old. The job was simple: photograph the reindeer at midnight on Christmas Eve. Just pictures, nothing more. The message ended with an unusual warning. Do not arrive before sunset. Do not stay after sunrise. And please, do not ask Santa to remove his gloves. Hannah's hands trembled slightly as she packed her camera gear. Lately, she'd been having trouble with night shots. The headlights in her viewfinder always seemed to blur into something else, something accusatory. But the money was too good to pass up, and December had been lean. Her rent was due, and magazine assignments had dried up faster than autumn leaves. The drive to Blackthorn Ranch took her through increasingly remote stretches of Wyoming wilderness. Cell service disappeared an hour back, replaced by static that seemed to whisper words just beyond comprehension. The GPS died 20 minutes ago, leaving her with handwritten directions that led her deeper into the pine-crowned mountains. Each curve in the road made her grip the steering wheel tighter. Memories of another snowy night threatening to surface. The ranch materialized from the darkness like a Christmas card come to life. Pristine white lights outlined every building, their glow impossibly bright against the heavy snow. 9 reindeer stood in perfect formation within their enclosure, breath steaming in the bitter cold. Near them, an ornate sleigh waited for tomorrow's tourists, its metal runners gleaming like silver in the moonlight. Something about their reflection made Hannah's chest tighten. They looked too much like skid marks on ice. Mr. Blackwood emerged from the main house, tall and thin, his gloved hands clasped before him. When he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes, but there was something familiar in his gaze, a weight she recognized from her own mirror. "You're right on time," he said, though Hannah hadn't told him when she'd arrive. His gloved finger traced a pattern in the frost on a nearby window. "The light here, it captures everything, every secret, every shadow. You'll see." After showing Hannah to her cabin, Blackwood suggested she familiarize herself with the ranch's layout before midnight. "Our guests expect perfection," he said, adjusting his gloves. "Every angle must capture the magic of Christmas Eve." His smile tightened, though some moments refuse to be captured. They require special techniques. Hannah started with the sleigh ride path, where tomorrow's guests would experience their authentic Christmas journey. Through her viewfinder, she noticed odd details. The sleigh's runners left no marks in the snow, yet seemed deeply grooved, as if worn by countless invisible journeys. When she checked her test shots, the digital display showed blurred figures seated in the empty sleigh, just artifacts of the low light, she told herself. The path wound through a forest of perfectly spaced pines, each hung with vintage ornaments that caught the moonlight like watching eyes. Motion sensors triggered recorded carols as she passed, but the music seemed wrong. Familiar melodies played at subtly wrong speeds, harmonies that created dissonance just below the threshold of comfort. In one shadowy grove, she found a child's mitten half buried in snow. When she photographed it, her display showed it clutched in a small hand, though it lay alone in the real scene. Each curve in the path revealed another carefully staged vignette. Mechanical deer posed in clearings, their joints too fluid for clockwork. Animatronic elves worked at candy-striped stations, their movements continuing for several seconds after their power cables disappeared into undisturbed snow. Through her lens, Hannah caught glimpses of other figures moving between the displays, shapes that shouldn't be there, dressed in clothes from different decades, all wearing expressions of growing realization. Near the path's midpoint, she found a life-sized nativity scene. Her camera's autofocus stuttered over the figures, as if their dimensions didn't quite match reality. In her test shots, the wooden faces seemed to shift expressions between frames, their painted eyes following her movement. The infant's manger lay conspicuously empty, its straw darkened with old stains that her camera rendered in unsettling shades of gold. "The children love this part," Blackwood said, appearing beside her. She hadn't heard him approach, though his footprints in the snow suggested he'd circled the scene 3 times before speaking. "They ask such innocent questions. Where's the baby? Why do the sheep have golden eyes? Children see truth so clearly." He brushed snow from the empty manger, his gloved fingers leaving fractal patterns of frost. "Sometimes I envy their honesty. Adults are so practiced at looking away." The children's photo area near Santa's chair drew her attention next. Vintage decorations surrounded an ornate throne, each bauble and tinsel strand placed with mathematical precision. A sign advertised "Memories that last forever," the words backed by a curious pattern that made her head ache. Hannah raised her camera, but the autofocus refused to lock, hunting back and forth, as if unable to determine the true distance to its subject. The throne itself seemed to shift between antique wood and something older, something made of shadow and bone. Having trouble? Blackwood adjusted the throne's position by millimeters, though it seemed perfect already. "Some subjects require manual focus, like memories. Sometimes we must choose what remains sharp and what we let blur." The Christmas lights pulsed gently, matching a rhythm Hannah felt in her bones, like a forgotten heartbeat. She noticed Blackwood's hands trembled slightly when he touched the throne's arm, frost spreading from his fingertips in patterns that looked distinctly like police tape at a crime scene. "The gift shop's popular," Blackwood said, leading her to a gingerbread-trimmed building. "Guests love taking home pieces of their experience." His voice carried a weight that suggested pieces meant something far more significant than souvenirs. Inside, shelves lined with snow globes caught her eye. Each contained a perfect miniature of the ranch, complete with tiny reindeer. As she photographed them, movement flickered in her viewfinder. Microscopic figures running through miniature snow, pursued by shadows with antlers. When she shook one globe, the snow swirled in impossible patterns, forming momentary images of faces she almost recognized. The shop's back wall displayed photographs from past Christmas seasons, arranged in a spiral pattern that drew the eye inward. Happy families posed with Santa, each smile perfect, each pose identical. But the pattern troubled her photographer's eye. The same faces appeared multiple times, years apart, unaged. And in each photo's background, barely visible, stood a black shape with golden eyes. Some visitors appeared in dozens of photos, their expressions growing more haunted with each appearance, until suddenly they stopped appearing at all. Testing her flash settings, Hannah noticed how the strobe light caught strange reflections in the family's eyes, pinpricks of gold that shouldn't be there. In one photo, a child sat on Santa's lap, their small hand touching his glove. Frost patterns spread from that point of contact, forming tiny branching paths like frozen lightning, or perhaps like guilt made visible. The date on that photo was exactly 1 year ago, but Hannah felt a peculiar certainty that it captured something much older. "You have quite an eye," Blackwood observed, studying her expression in a nearby mirror. His reflection seemed delayed, moving a fraction of a second after he did. "You see what others miss. That's quite a gift, and quite a curse." He straightened a crooked frame, revealing more photos behind it. Darker images, faces caught in moments of revelation or terror. Some showed the sleigh ride path at night, empty except for strange shadows cast by nothing. Others captured the reindeer in impossible poses, their bodies twisted into shapes that suggested something trying to break free of a deer's form. Hannah's camera grew heavier in her hands. The viewfinder showed impossible things: guilt captured in silver halide, sin preserved in pixels. Each test shot revealed another layer of wrongness beneath the ranch's perfect Christmas veneer. Families smiling too widely, children's eyes reflecting golden light, Santa's gloved hands leaving frost patterns on shoulders that spread like crystallized secrets. In one frame, she caught Blackwood's reflection, watching her through 7 different mirrors, each version of him dressed in the style of a different century. "Why do they come back?" she asked, noticing how many visitors returned year after year, their faces increasingly haunted in each photo. The walls seemed to pulse now, the pictures rippling like memories, trying to surface. "Same reason you did," Blackwood replied softly. "Some pictures demand to be retaken. Some moments refuse to stay buried." He checked his watch, an ancient thing that ticked backwards. "Speaking of time, midnight approaches. The reindeer await. Just remember, Hannah, every photograph tells 2 stories: what's in the frame and what's left out. The trick is knowing which story is hunting you." As they walked back toward the enclosure, Hannah reviewed her test shots. Each image was slightly different from what she remembered capturing, as if the ranch rearranged itself the moment she looked away. In one, the nativity scene's empty manger cradled a shadow shaped like guilt. In another, the sleigh's runners left tracks that spelled out accusations in a language she wished she couldn't read. In the last photo, motion blur caught her eye. She zoomed in, heart stopping as the blur resolved. Headlights cutting through snow, a figure running away, a moment of impact frozen forever in perfect digital clarity. She nearly dropped the camera. Behind her, Blackwood's breath frosted in the air as he whispered, "Some photographs find us, Hannah, no matter how far we run. The lens remembers what the mind tries to forget." The photographs lined every wall of Blackwood's study, countless images spanning decades, each showing the same moment, when guilt became visible through a lens. Hannah's hands shook as she recognized her own face in several frames, each dated 1 year apart, each showing her expression at the exact moment of remembering. "The ranch chooses its visitors carefully," Blackwood said, removing one glove to reveal flesh that gleamed like frost. "Every Christmas Eve, thousands come for their perfect holiday photos. Santa reads their sins through his gloves, the stag watches, and those marked by guilt." He touched a photograph, frost spreading from his fingers. "They always return." Hannah's crime flashed through her mind: headlights in snow, a sudden impact, tires spinning as she fled into the night. The memory hit her with physical force, dropping her to her knees. "How long?" she whispered. 5 years, Blackwood answered, his voice gentler now. 5 cycles of remembering and forgetting. I was like you once, a different crime, a different century, but the same weight. He gestured to the oldest photographs, where he stood in a Santa suit, his face gradually aging backwards through the images. The stag doesn't just feed on guilt. It preserves it, keeps it fresh through endless repetition. Through the window, Hannah watched the black stag pacing. In its golden eyes, she saw her own guilt reflected back infinitely, like mirrors facing mirrors, each reflection showing another moment she'd tried to forget. Why show me all this now? Blackwood's frost-bound hand closed over hers. Because every curse has a loophole. Every photograph has its negative. And maybe, just maybe, you're finally ready to face what's been hunting you. At midnight, the stag's true form erupted from its reindeer disguise, its antlers twisted into thorns, its golden eyes multiplied across its face like a spider's, and its coat rippled with the faces of its captive souls. The perfect Christmas scene shattered into a nightmare playground. The creature bent reality with each stride. Snow drifts became walls, trees danced on ancient roots, and Christmas lights stretched into neon cages. Hannah ran past empty sleighs that rocked with phantom passengers, their bells tolling a rhythm that matched her racing heart. Each decoration transformed into a weapon. Wreaths sprouted thorns, candy canes curved into hooks, and the mechanical Santa turned his head to watch, his gloved hands reaching. The stag wasn't just chasing her. It was recreating her original crime. Snow sprayed beneath her feet like it had that night. Lights blurred into oncoming traffic. Each turn brought her back to the moment of impact, forcing her to relive her cowardice again and again. The landscape shifted with her guilt, driving her toward the sleigh ride trail, where shadow versions of herself took endless rides through the dark. She saw herself from previous years, running the same path, making the same choices. The stag was making her witness every moment she'd tried to forget. Blackwood's voice cut through the chaos. "The barn, Hannah. The key in your pocket. It's not just for hiding this time." The brass key materialized in her hand, its symbols glowing with accumulated guilt. The barn loomed ahead, but its shape kept changing, like a photograph being repeatedly recomposed. Behind her, the stag's hooves struck sparks that burned through time itself. Hannah slammed the barn door shut, her trembling hands fighting with the ancient key. The lock's mechanism screamed like a dying animal as it turned. Golden light seeped through the keyhole, illuminating symbols carved into the wood. Protection runes, she realized, though she couldn't remember how she knew their meaning. The barn's interior defied physical space. Rafters stretched endlessly upward into darkness, and the walls seemed to breathe. Hundreds of identical journals lined the shelves, their spines marked with dates spanning centuries. Hannah grabbed the nearest one, recognition hitting her as she saw her own handwriting. December 24th, 1983. First time here. Made a deal. We'll forget until next year. December 24th, 1994. 10th time. The stag is collecting us, growing stronger. December 24th, 2023. Lost count. The time between remembering and forgetting grows shorter. Outside, the stag's antlers scraped against the walls, leaving trails of golden fire in the wood. Its voices, all of them, including her own, called out in a terrible chorus. "Let us in, Hannah. Let yourself in. You're already here, after all. You've always been here." She backed away from the door, memories flooding back with brutal clarity. She wasn't just seeing her past selves in those photographs. She was all of them. Every year, every chase, every deal. The stag hadn't been collecting different victims. It had been collecting her, over and over, feeding on her terror through decades, through centuries. The barn shuddered as the stag circled it. In the highest rafters, something moved. Hannah looked up to see earlier versions of herself perched like birds, their eyes reflecting golden light. Some wore clothing from the 1800s, others from decades she couldn't name. All wore the same expression of desperate revelation. "You understand now?" The words came from everywhere and nowhere. "Every year you run here. Every year you hide. Every year you write in that journal, hoping next time will be different. But you're not escaping, Hannah. You're just giving me more of yourself to feed on. Your fear tastes better each time." The protection runes began to fade, their power weakening. But as Hannah watched them dim, she noticed something. The symbols weren't just failing, they were changing. With each cycle, each chase, each terrified etching, they had evolved. Not to keep the stag out, she realized, but to keep it in. "A camera captures light," Blackwood shouted as he burst into the barn, tearing off his gloves. "But guilt bends it." His hands glowed with centuries of absorbed sins, each touch leaving frost patterns that formed a complex lens across the barn's walls. The stag preserves guilt through endless repetition. So let's give it eternity. Hannah understood. She raised her camera as the stag charged, its antlers aimed at Blackwood's heart. The symbols on the walls weren't just wards. They were apertures, f-stops, controlling the flow of guilt itself. And Blackwood, with his frost-bound hands and centuries of witnessed sins, was offering himself as the film. The trap worked. As the stag's antlers pierced Blackwood, his collected guilt exploded outward in a flash of absolute cold. Hannah's camera captured the moment, freezing the stag between moments, between guilt and absolution. The creature's endless collection of souls poured out through her lens, finding peace in final exposure. But freedom had its price. Every memory the stag had stolen came rushing back, not just the hit and run, but every year after, every attempt to run from her guilt, every deal she'd made to forget. She remembered Blackwood's patient guidance each time, his gentle attempts to help her face her truth, even as his own guilt kept him bound to the ranch. The perfect Christmas facade crumbled as dawn broke. The mechanical Santa slumped, just a dummy now. The sleighs stilled. 9 ordinary reindeer grazed peacefully in the snow. Hannah's camera held one final image, a twist of golden antlers dissolving into light, caught forever in a frame of her own making. They found Blackwood's body at sunrise, his hands finally warm, a peaceful smile on his face. On his desk lay 2 items: Hannah's written confession about the hit and run, and a decades-old photograph showing a young Blackwood in a Santa suit, his ungloved hands already beginning to frost. Hannah turned herself in that morning. Some guilt, she'd learned, shouldn't be hidden. Some photographs need to be developed in the light. If this tale from the Blackthorn Ranch has captured your darkest Christmas memories. Share it with fellow horror enthusiasts who understand that some photographs are better left undeveloped. And don't forget to subscribe to the Nightmare Maestro and ring that notification bell to ensure you never miss the moment when ordinary holiday magic transforms into something far more sinister. After all, you never know when you might need a reminder of the stories that refuse to stay buried.